Howdy doodles. I'm P. Kennedy, and these are D&D Stories. They are short stories of things that have happened in the expansive campaigns I run. This is the story of the time my players unleashed an ancient evil. Part 2. A few things before we get started. I run 3 to 4 groups in the same world at the same time, so if one group does something, it tends to affect the other group's stories. All of my campaigns are always interconnected, and if you haven't seen Ancient Evil Part 1, it's a setup for what's to come in this video. Let's go over the characters that are important to this story. The villains that we'll be mentioning, we'll see the return very briefly of Evil McMagic Lady, and the main villains that we'll be focusing on will be the Hot Topic Spookers. The parties that are important for this story, as far as giving you context, we'll have Group A, which is a party you haven't heard of before. They will be known as the Crusaders. Deus Vult. Additionally, we will mention Group C, and again, if you haven't seen the Ancient Evil Part 1 video, I highly suggest watching it, and you can learn about Group C and all of their antics. Alright, let's get started. So the Crusaders, Deus Vult, were tracking Evil McMagic Lady, and she had jumped ship and crossed the border into a neighboring country that we'll call Nerdy Magic Land. The players decided to follow her and said they wanted to cross the border into Nerdy Magic Land, except it wasn't that easy. The nation the players were a part of was in an open war with Nerdy Magic Land, and there was a border conflict, and crossing into the country on foot was dangerous because of the clashing armies. Bandits started to raid smugglers' roads because so many people were forced to use them. The only safe way to get across the border without teleportation magic was to take a riverboat, but because so many people were trying to get across the border, the fares were outrageous. So my players had the choice to take a river ferry for a butt ton of gold or risk traveling on foot. The Crusaders were made up of some pretty bulky characters and said, what's the worst that could happen? And decided to save their gold and travel on foot, figuring they could negotiate if they ran into some patrolling soldiers or beat up any bandits they found on the road and turn them over to the regional authorities. So I nodded and rolled a percentage die, which rolled as a 1 out of 100. If you're unfamiliar with how Dungeons & Dragons works, whenever you are skipping long periods of time while the player characters are attempting something, you can roll a D100 and see how well the players do on their task. 100 meaning things worked out really well for them, or 1 meaning that things were going to go horribly wrong for the players. Unbeknown to the Crusaders, another group of players were traveling in this region just a few days prior. Don't forget, all of my campaigns are interconnected. The other group, which was Group C, was traveling in this region. That group of players dove into a burial site and dispelled the seals that kept an ancient evil locked up. Rather than dealing with their mistakes, that group of players ran away and left the door wide open. The ancient evil, which I dubbed Hot Topic Spookers, got out and started ravaging the countryside, performing necromantic rituals on villages and calling the souls of the slain warriors they defeated in combat to come back and serve them. So when the Crusaders said, what's the worst that could happen? They had no idea the worst was a challenge level 14 skeletal death knight who recruited a 13th level caster along with the service of a sword wraith commander and her fallen warrior spirits, in addition to the entire horde of undead skeletons and zombies the death knight raised. The party was level 9. The players looked at me and I looked at them. If anyone knows me, I seldom ever fudge dice rolls. I do as the gods of the dice instruct me. I am but their humble messenger. But what the players know, and what I know, is not too long ago I TPK'd this group already, and they had to roll up new characters. And more specifically, one of the players in this group, I killed his character nearly 6 sessions ago at this point. And the thing that led him to dying was an uttering of the very same phrase, what's the worst that could happen? One side note, I actually DM'd that player in another campaign before the Ilderon Tales started, and I gave his character a bag of beans, which is a magical bag of beans. When you plant one, randomly mostly beneficial things happen. The player said, what's the worst that could happen? And decided to plant one of the beans, rolled his die for the random event, and got the rarest, worst option as the bean grew into a Mummy Lord's lair with a challenge rating 18 Mummy Lord inside of it, in the middle of a peaceful merchant city. Back to the story at hand, we all knew where this was heading. The players sighed and rolled initiative. Combat took all session. The Death Knight charged the party. The players rotated flanks, pressed their advantage where they could, retreated and took defensive formations. Whenever one of the players would drop, The Death Knight took any opportunity he could to throw hellfire orbs at the party anytime they crowded together to heal each other. I planned on killing 3 to 6 of the players, but to my surprise, after 7 to 8 long rounds of combat, each player was at 1 or 2 HP with no resources left. The Paladin delivered the final blow to the Death Knight, expending her last spell slot to smite it away, and the players miraculously survived. I wanted to share this story because from time to time we still talk about this fight on our Discord. This was probably the meanest, hardest combat encounter I've ever thrown at a party. I informed my players their path that they had chosen was dangerous, and they still chose to take it. So I didn't pull any punches because they knew they chose to play the game on hard mode. What they didn't know was thanks to the actions of another set of players, hard mode got turned into nightmare mode. Anyways, that concludes the story of how one of my groups of players unleashed an ancient evil and left it for another group of players to clean up. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, as it will help other people see it. If you want to hear more epic and funny D&D stories, subscribe to the channel. I publish these videos weekly. Have a great day. Bye!